Second month of the Cold War with my boyfriend. He brought an incredibly stunning girl to the party. Someone teased, "Fabian, this is more like your taste. By the way, what did you ever see in Regina?" Fabian gave a lazy smile. "Never dated an ordinary girl before. Thought I'd give it a try." I stood outside the door. Didn't cry. Didn't make a scene. Nor did I go in to confront him. I just knew very clearly that this was the end for Fabian and me. Chapter 1. Fabian hasn't contacted me in a month. Actually, over the past 6 months, I've noticed him becoming distant. But whenever he stayed over, he clung to me all night long. I felt a little lost, remembering our last time together a month ago. That night, Fabian had a few drinks. I wore the new nightdress my best friend gave me. When I walked out of the bathroom, Fabian's gaze changed. It was as if we were back in the early days of our relationship. A little wild. By the end of the night, I almost thought I might die in bed. But after he left the next day, he stopped answering my calls and texts. I'm a very passive person. When Fabian ignored me, I tried reaching out a few times but quickly stopped making a fool of myself, until several classmates started hinting at something, asking if Fabian and I had a fight. They had seen Fabian with different girls on several occasions, each one beautiful, with amazing figures. Fabian seemed pretty close with them. I couldn't help but walk to the mirror, and then I saw the plain, ordinary me. I've been an unremarkable girl since I was little. Growing up didn't change that. I remained average. It made sense that Fabian would tire of me, but I wanted to try one more time, to fight for us. After all, I truly liked Fabian, long before he even knew I existed. I had already been secretly in love with him for a long time. I pulled out all my dresses and tried them on. In the end, I boldly chose the burgundy slip dress. I carefully curled my hair and put on light makeup. Tonight, a friend was having a birthday party. Fabian would be there. I missed him. I wanted to see him, to take him home. Chapter 2. The birthday party was quite grand. I didn't come with Fabian, so it took me a bit of time to find my way in. By the time the waiter led me in, the atmosphere was already lively. The room was full of elegance and glamour. Even though I had gone through the effort of dressing up, I still blended into the background. So, no one noticed me as I arrived amidst the lively crowd. All eyes were on Fabian and the stunning girl beside him. I had never seen a girl so beautiful. Looking at her, I couldn't even muster a shred of jealousy. She was just standing there in a simple black dress, her long hair down. She wore a pair of pearl earrings, her face nearly bare. She stood confidently next to Fabian, the two of them a perfect match, looking like they belonged together. Friends couldn't resist teasing him. "Fabian, aren't you going to introduce her to us?" With a beauty like this, even last year's Miss Hong Kong would pale in comparison. "Yeah, this is more your taste. By the way, what did you ever see in Regina?" At the mention of my name, the crowd finally seemed to remember that Fabian had a girlfriend, me. The mood suddenly became awkward, but Fabian broke the silence. "Why is everyone so quiet?" "Haha, we're just curious. Really, after all, when you started dating Regina, it really surprised us." Fabian gave a casual smile. "What? Never dated an ordinary girl before. Thought I'd give it a try." "Of course. She's a bit too ordinary." Everyone burst into laughter again. I stood in the back, unnoticed in the corner, watching as Fabian and that girl were surrounded like the stars around the moon. 2 years had passed, and yet it felt like I was right back where I started. Fabian was always the center of attention, perched at the top of the social pyramid, and I, always the ordinary girl, blending into the crowd. Chapter 3. I didn't go over to make a fool of myself, but I didn't cry either. The sadness was so heavy, it numbed me. Yet, when I saw Fabian shielding that girl from drinks, standing protectively in front of her, a sudden sharp pain pierced my heart, like a needle stabbing through, drawing blood. Back then, countless beautiful girls were chasing after Fabian, but he chose me, and he genuinely settled down. It shocked a lot of people. I used to foolishly think I was like the lucky Cinderella in those cheesy romance novels, the one who tamed the wild prince. But now I've completely woken up. I knew in my heart, This was the end for Fabian and me. On the way back, I got a message from Fabian. "Why didn't you come tonight?" "Wasn't feeling well, so I didn't go." Fabian didn't reply. I put my phone back in my bag, watching the fleeting night scenes outside the car window. And somehow, I suddenly remembered the night we made things official. Fabian cornered me in an empty hallway. I was nervous, panicked, and confused. Yet there was a hidden joy and anticipation. "Regina." I didn't expect him to know my name. When he said it, I instinctively looked up at him. The summer night breeze was cool, but sweat kept dripping down my back, and my palms were sticky and damp. "I've been noticing you for a long time. I've always thought you were adorable." Fabian walked up to me, smiling. "Do you want to be my girlfriend, Regina?" Suddenly, I closed my eyes, sitting in the speeding cab, in the bright yet dark night of this bustling city. I let the tears silently fall down my face. Chapter 4. After a few drinks, Fabian's head felt a little dizzy, so he put down his glass and got up to go to the balcony. He took out a cigarette and had just lit it when a friend walked over. Someone just said they think they saw Regina. The cigarette in Fabian's hand paused slightly. "When?" His friend glanced at him and lowered his voice. "I think it was when they were joking about how you ended up with Regina back then." Suddenly, the cigarette tasted different to Fabian. He stubbed out half of it in the ashtray. The rolled-up sleeves of his shirt had a faint jasmine scent. At home, Regina liked to put her grandmother's homemade jasmine sachets in the closet. For some reason, Fabian thought of the jasmine tea Regina would make him whenever he was drunk. Everything Regina liked was just like her. A little bland, easy to grow tired of over time. Yet somehow, the scent lingered, catching you off guard when you least expected it. "Do you think Regina will be mad?" his friend asked, a bit concerned. Fabian, however, was sure, "No, even if she is, she's easy to appease." "So what do you really want, Regina or Miss Lynn?" his friend asked. Fabian lit another cigarette. When he finished that one, he finally raised an eyebrow and smiled. "Can't I have both?" His friend seemed surprised. "You're not planning on breaking up with Regina?" Fabian shot him a glance. "Why should I?" Regina was so obedient, so easy to deal with, even though he was tired of her now. Breaking up wasn't on his mind. But right now, Fabian didn't feel like comforting her. Regina would end up comforting herself anyway. Chapter 5. After that night, it was as if Fabian had completely disappeared from my world. I stayed at my best friend's place for a few days. After I had somewhat calmed down, I returned to my place near the school and packed up my things. Before leaving, I carefully checked to make sure I hadn't left anything behind, and then I locked the door and left. I had applied for an exchange program at a university in the South. It was for 2 years. I would be leaving in a week. Once, I saw Fabian's car from afar, near the school. That same beautiful girl from that night got out of the car with him. They went to a street vendor and bought some food. It was a late spring afternoon, around 4 o'clock. The sunlight filtered lazily through the leaves. The students and couples passing by all had youthful, radiant faces. I stood under the camphor tree, holding a stack of books, dressed in the most ordinary sweatshirt and jeans, watching the person I once loved so easily fall for someone else. How could I not feel sad? But the spring sun was beautiful. I was still young. It felt like there wasn't much I couldn't bounce back from. Chapter 6. A little over 2 weeks after I arrived in the South, Fabian called me for the first time. I was just leaving the library with my arms full of books when I heard his voice in my ear. A voice that suddenly felt so unfamiliar. "Regina, are you in your dorm? Or where are you? How about I come pick you up?" I stayed silent for a moment before I finally responded. "I'm not in the dorm. I'm not in Hong Kong either. Where did you go, Regina?" "I applied for an exchange program. I left a week ago." "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you talk to me about it?" Fabian's voice suddenly rose. "Fabian, I've been waiting for your call all this time, and now that it's here, I can finally say it. Regina." Fabian's voice was urgent, as if he had more to say, but I cut him off. "You were the one who asked to start this relationship, so now, I'm the one ending it. Fabian, let's break up, and please, Don't call me or try to contact me again, Regina." Before he could say more, I hung up. Fabian called back almost immediately. I didn't answer. Once the ringing stopped, I deleted and blocked all his contact information. At that moment, I felt a strange sadness, but even more than that, I felt a deep sense of relief. Chapter 7. Fabian yanked off his tie and tossed it aside. Maybe it was the burn of alcohol making him irritable, or maybe it was the fact that the usually obedient Regina had silently walked away and declared their breakup. That had caught him off guard. But Fabian was never one to brood. Born with a silver spoon in his mouth, Fabian had always gotten what he wanted. There had never been anything or anyone that he couldn't have. Regina was the only girlfriend he had publicly acknowledged. Unlike other women, she was different, and as long as he didn't say it was over, then Regina would never be able to leave. Fabian picked up his phone and dialed a number. "You've been in the South recently, right? There's something I need your help with." "Yeah, don't hurt her. I'm not doing this to get back at her." He just wanted Regina to understand that only he, Fabian, could protect her. Only by staying by his side could she live freely, without fear. Chapter 8. Just as my shift at the tea shop was ending, Anna, one of the employees, called to me in a low voice. "Regina, look, that car's here again." I glanced up and immediately spotted the Rolls-Royce parked across the street. The license plate looked somewhat familiar. I frowned slightly, almost cutting my finger with the fruit knife. "Regina, is he here for you?" I sighed and shook my head. "Do you really think that's possible?" Anna looked at me and giggled. Since moving to the South, I realized there were even more beautiful women here than I had ever seen. A plain girl like me was just a drop in the ocean, incapable of making even the smallest ripple. That car had been parked outside the shop for an entire week. While the license plate seemed familiar, I hadn't connected it to myself. After my shift ended, I changed into my clothes, grabbed my bag, and left. As I walked past the Rolls-Royce, I hurried by, just like I had the past few days, not sparing it a second glance. But this time, the car door suddenly opened as I walked by. Startled, I instinctively stepped back to avoid it, but the man who stepped out had already called my name. "Are you Miss Regina?" "And you are?" "No need to be nervous, miss. Our Zhao would like to meet with you." "Zhao? I don't know any Zhao." The window of the back seat slowly lowered halfway. In the dim light, I saw Joseph sitting inside. We didn't really know each other well. It was only through Fabian that I occasionally saw him at gatherings. We barely spoke, never really interacted. Fabian's circle was full of wealthy playboys. They were notorious for their wild antics and the constant parade of women. Joseph would sometimes join them for sports or poker games, but I never saw him bring any women along. I even once commented to Fabian how Joseph seemed like someone who kept to himself. At the time, Fabian had gotten jealous, pulling me close. "And what about me? You're saying I'm not keeping to myself, Regina? Ever since I started dating you, I'm practically the perfect boyfriend. And now you're talking about other men? Besides, how many times have you even seen Joseph? Do you know what he's like behind the scenes?" The Zhao family runs both sides of the law in the South. When he was playing with guns and women, you were still in elementary school. Let me warn you, stay away from him. He's ruthless, and he never forgets a slight. If you ever get on his bad side, even I won't be able to protect you. Fabian's words had definitely scared me. After that, I consciously avoided Joseph. We would occasionally exchange a word or two, but eventually, I'd go out of my way to avoid him entirely. And over time, Joseph just stopped showing up altogether. I hadn't seen him in over 6 months. Not until now, and I certainly hadn't expected him to come looking for me. "Regina," Joseph spoke, his deep voice calling my name. The streetlight outside the car was bright, its glow filtering through the branches of the camphor tree. The light flickered and swayed, casting shifting shadows over Joseph's sharp, defined features. He was dressed in a suit, a lit cigarette held between his fingers. Smoke curled softly around his face. It had been so long since I'd seen him that I suddenly found him unfamiliar. Maybe it was the rumors about him that lingered in my mind. A strange sense of fear and unease stirred inside me. "Zhao, What do you need from me? I asked, my voice a little shaky. Joseph seemed to smile slightly, his gaze falling slowly onto my face. Regina, have you offended someone? Because people in the South have been called in to invite you for tea. Chapter 9. I was stunned by what I heard, and after the shock, an overwhelming wave of fear swept over me. Joseph had said it politely, but I understood the implication very clearly. He wasn't just inviting me for tea, this was kidnapping. But I had only been in the South for 2 weeks. I hadn't offended anyone. Still, Joseph wouldn't tell me this for no reason. The more I thought about it, the more scared I became. Without realizing it, tears began to stream down my face. I didn't offend anyone. Zhao, there must be some kind of misunderstanding, right? Whether it's a misunderstanding or not, I don't know, he said flatly. But when someone takes money, they do what they're paid to do. That's how it works. Zhao. I wanted to ask for his help, but I didn't know how. After all, I barely knew Joseph. He and Fabian were on good terms, but Fabian and I had already broken up. Regina, I'm only telling you this because we know each other. Be careful for the next while. Don't go anywhere alone. With that, Joseph motioned for his driver to get in the car. Just then, I noticed a few unfamiliar and rough-looking men standing under a tree not far away. They had been watching me the whole time. As Joseph's driver got into the car, those men snuffed out their cigarettes and started walking toward me. A chill ran down my spine, cold sweat soaking through my back. My survival instinct kicked in, and I instinctively ran toward Joseph's car. Just as the car was about to start, I grabbed onto the window, which hadn't yet fully rolled up. Joseph. Bad people are after me. I'm scared. Can you let me in, please? My voice trembled with fear, tears rolling uncontrollably down my face. Joseph sat there, expressionless. Fabian had always said that Joseph was cold-hearted, ruthless, and never forgot a grudge. I had no real connection with him. Why would he help me? The fact that he came to warn me tonight was already more than I could ask for. I lowered my wet eyelashes and slowly loosened my grip. But then Joseph spoke. Get in. Chapter 10. I stared in shock, wide-eyed. Joseph. The door opened and then closed again as the car sped forward into traffic. In the rearview mirror, I saw those men chase after us for a few steps before stopping, unwilling to give up. One of them even seemed to be holding a knife. A wave of fear washed over me. Joseph. Thank you so much for earlier. I expressed my gratitude seriously. Joseph had been staring straight ahead, but now his gaze shifted slowly to my face. Regina, what are you going to do next time? I froze. He was right. I couldn't just stay inside forever. Next time, I might not be so lucky. Even if I called the police, they couldn't be there every time. And by the way, I don't accept simple thank yous as payment. The divider between the front and back of the car suddenly lowered. The large vehicle instantly felt split in two. Now, in the private space of the back seat, it was just me and Joseph. The smell of smoke on him was strong, and there was a faint scar at the end of his brow. Even sitting there calmly, his presence was imposing, completely different from the easygoing type of Fabian. I instinctively shrank back, trying to create some distance between us, but Joseph had already reached out and grabbed my arm. Regina. I'm not some kind-hearted fool who helps people for no reason. His grip tightened slightly, pulling me forward. I tried to pull away, but his grip only grew stronger. With the slight jolt of the car, my nose nearly brushed against his chin. Fear, panic, and helplessness flooded my senses. This was the South. This was Joseph's territory. He had connections in both the underworld and with the authorities. I feared pain. I feared death. I was just an ordinary student from an ordinary family. I wasn't the kind of person who could maintain her pride in such a situation, willing to die before compromising. Joseph, you saved me this time. I'll repay you. I tried to pull my body back, avoiding any more contact. Really, I'm not just saying thanks. I'll do everything I can to repay you. Regina, I don't need people trying to repay me. Then what do you need? I need a woman. With a strong tug, Joseph pulled me directly into his arms. My nose hit his firm chest, the pain bringing tears to my eyes instantly. Joseph gripped my chin, wiping away the tears at the corners of my eyes. Regina, remember this. I only take care of my own woman's problems. Other people's lives and deaths have nothing to do with me. The meaning in his words was clear. If this happened again, and I got chased down and killed in the street, he wouldn't even glance at me. Instinctively, I glanced up at Joseph again. At this close range, the scar on his brow seemed even more menacing and terrifying. I was caught between a rock and a hard place, completely at a loss. The car stopped in front of Joseph's massive mansion. He ordered the maid to take me to rest in one of the guest rooms. Think it over tonight. Give me your answer tomorrow. Can I go back to school? You can, but if anything happens, I won't help again. With that, Joseph turned and walked away. I shut my mouth and stood there for a moment before obediently following the maid to the guest room. Chapter 11. Joseph stood in the garden, smoking for a while. Only when Regina's figure disappeared from sight did he look away. His phone had been ringing for quite some time. Fabian was calling. Joseph smirked and called him back. Fabian answered quickly. Brother 4. How did things go? Just as you expected. Did she freak out? Joseph thought back to Regina standing outside the car, her face pale with fear, tears streaming down her cheeks. A strange softness crept into his heart. Yeah, she was really scared. Cried quite a bit. I knew it. She's always been so timid. The mockery in Joseph's eyes deepened. When are you coming to the south? I'll wait a little longer. When she's really terrified and comes begging me for help. Brother 4. Please make sure your men just scare her. Don't let her get hurt. Got it. Joseph hung up the phone, smoked a few more cigarettes, and then headed towards the main building where Regina was staying. The guest room on the second floor was already dark and quiet. Joseph stopped a maid and asked, Did the young lady say anything earlier? The maid shook her head. She didn't say much, but it seemed like she cried again. She just fell asleep. Joseph nodded and added, Prepare a Chinese breakfast tomorrow. She prefers that. Yes, sir. Joseph went upstairs and stood outside the guest room for a while. He seemed to be thinking about something, and a faint smile crossed his face. After a few minutes, he turned and went to his own room. Chapter 12. I had nightmares all night. In my dreams, I was either being chased by those men with knives, butchered into pieces on the street, or kidnapped, held for ransom, and buried alive. If not that, I was thrown into the deep sea with weights tied to me, quickly devoured by fish until there was nothing left. By the time I got up in the morning, my dark circles were so heavy that I looked terrifying. I stared blankly at my reflection in the mirror, remembering the dangers I had faced yesterday, the endless nightmares. I couldn't stop the tears from welling up again. It seemed like I had no other choice. I didn't dare tell my parents either. It would only make them worry and live in fear. Reporting this to the police? There hadn't been any actual harm done yet. By the time something did happen, I'd be dead long before the police arrived. With my head heavy and my feet light, I got up, took a shower, and changed clothes before going downstairs. Joseph was already sitting in the living room. When he saw me, he put down his coffee. I dragged my feet, practically shuffling down the last few steps. With my head lowered, I stood in front of him. Have you thought it over? I bit my lip, steeling myself, and nodded. Joseph, it's just, can you give me some time to adjust? I can give you time, but I'm not a patient man. It won't take long. I promise. All right. He agreed readily. I couldn't help but let out a small sigh of relief. But then Joseph spoke again. Regina, come here. I hesitated, but eventually walked over to him. For what happened yesterday, I expect some form of repayment. As he spoke, he reached out and grabbed my arm. Before I could react, he pulled me so hard that I lost my balance and fell into his arms. Joseph didn't give me time to push him away or escape. The moment I landed in his arms, he kissed me. His lips tasted faintly of bitter black coffee. I was so stunned that my eyes stayed wide open, but Joseph lifted his hand, covering my eyes. Regina, close your eyes, and open your mouth. Chapter 13. Don't move, and I won't go any further. I told you, don't move. I immediately stiffened, my whole body tensing up, not daring to move. When the kiss finally ended, I was still in a daze. Joseph leaned back on the sofa, and I realized at some point I had ended up straddling his lap. He raised his hand and wiped the moisture from the corner of my lips. "Didn't Fabian ever teach you how to kiss?" Hearing Fabian's name snapped me back to reality. Joseph. Fabian and I were together for almost 2 years. You know that. I know. So what? Then why are you coming after me? Because I want to. Joseph said this. And for some reason, a flash of irritation crossed his eyes. He grabbed my chin and kissed me again. This time, the kiss was deeper, more intense. When it ended, he bit my lower lip gently. "Regina, since you've broken up, stop thinking about your ex. Don't forget who you're with now." I covered my mouth, muttering quietly, "But you were the one who brought him up first. You're not allowed to mention him either." Okay. On the way back to school, Joseph didn't say much to me. When I got out of the car, he didn't leave right away. It wasn't until I entered the school gates that he finally turned the car around and drove off. After that, Joseph personally picked me up from school or a nearby tea shop every day. Because of this, the men who had been stalking me never found the chance to make a move. 2 weeks later, as I walked out of the school gates, I suddenly realized that Joseph's car hadn't arrived yet. And then, from a black SUV parked by the roadside, a few men got out. Instinctively, I turned to run back toward the school, but I was already blocked. The sky was beginning to darken, and I thought I saw the man in front of me holding a knife. In that moment, a bone-chilling fear gripped me, and my entire body started trembling. Just as I was about to scream for help, a pair of bright headlights suddenly cut through the dusk. The car was unmistakable, Joseph's Rolls-Royce. Relief washed over me, and I instinctively called out Joseph's name. Before the car had even come to a full stop, Joseph swung the door open and got out. Several bodyguards from the car behind him jumped out as well. The men surrounding me immediately scattered, running off into the night. My legs went weak, and I nearly collapsed. But Joseph caught me in time, holding me steady. "It's okay now, Regina." He gently stroked my back, pulling me into a tight embrace. I was so shaken that I could hardly stand. I clung to his sleeve, leaning into him. "Joseph, my legs. I can't stand." "It's all right, I'll carry you to the car." Joseph brushed a hand over my hair, then bent down to pick me up. Just as he lifted me, I heard a familiar voice. "Regina." In the dark night, Fabian stood alone by his car. His face was shadowed in the night, making it impossible to read the emotions in his eyes. Chapter 14. Joseph paused mid-step. Fabian gave a self-deprecating laugh. "Brother 4, this is why you asked me to come tonight, isn't it?" Joseph didn't deny it. "Fabian, you handed this opportunity to me yourself. I simply took it the moment it presented itself." "I don't understand, Brother 4. I've always respected you, called you Brother 4. But what you're doing now, isn't it a bit against the code of brotherhood? What exactly have I done? You know full well about my relationship with Regina." "What relationship?" Joseph cut him off coldly. "If my memory serves me right, you told me on the phone that you and Regina were already broken up." "Yes, Regina broke up with me, but I didn't agree to it. That's why I came up with all these plans to win her back. Breaking up doesn't require your agreement. If she says it's over, then it's over. Fine. Even if we're broken up, Regina is still my ex. We were together for 2 years. Fabian took out a pack of cigarettes, lit one, and his smile turned mocking. "Brother 4, did you really have to pick up a woman I've already slept with? Did you really have to do this to piss me off?" My body stiffened instantly, and my fingers tightened around Joseph's sleeve. Joseph remained silent, but I could feel the cold fury radiating from him. I took a deep breath and turned to face Fabian. Fabian seemed reluctant to meet my gaze. "Regina." "Fabian, you said you were here to win me back. So where do you get the audacity to think I'd disgust myself by going back to a man someone else has already slept with?" "Regina." Fabian's face twisted with anger. Joseph suddenly chuckled. "What's wrong?" "She's not wrong." He carried me over to the car. "You should head home." He placed me in the back seat, then gently brushed his hand across my face. "I'll handle this. Be good." Joseph. I instinctively tried to hold on to him, but he had already closed the door and instructed the driver to leave. As the car started, I looked through the window and saw Joseph's cold, resolute profile, with no expression on his face. He took a few steps toward Fabian and landed a heavy punch straight on his face. I didn't know if Fabian would fight back, nor did I know who would come out on top. As the car turned the corner, everything disappeared from sight. Chapter 15. Joseph didn't come back until late that night. When I heard the sound of the car, I immediately got up from bed and ran to the window. It was a bit far, so I couldn't tell if he was hurt. Joseph stepped out of the car and took a few steps before suddenly looking up at my window. I instinctively hid behind the curtains. It wasn't until the tassels of the curtains dug painfully into my palm that I snapped back to reality. The whole evening, I had been worried about Joseph. Realizing this made my heart race. The door to the room suddenly knocked. I stood there for a while before finally walking over to open it. The moment the door opened, Joseph pulled me into a tight embrace. I smelled the faint scent of blood, and panic surged through me. "Are you hurt?" I tried to push him away to check his injuries, but Joseph pinned me against the door. "I'm not hurt." He wanted to hurt me, but he's not capable of that. "But I smell blood. It's Fabian's blood." "Don't worry." Joseph kissed me gently before releasing me. "I'm going to take a shower. Wait for me." As the sound of water filled the bathroom, I lit a jasmine-scented incense tablet. Over the time I had spent with Joseph, I realized we had many similar tastes. We both liked Chinese-style breakfasts. We both liked jasmine tea. Even the books and movies we liked were the same. All the incense used in his house had a jasmine scent. These jasmine incense tablets were intricately made, and I really liked using them. The fragrance slowly filled the room, calming my restless heart. Once, because of Fabian, I had decided to stay far away from men of their class. Because girls like me, ordinary girls, couldn't afford to play their games. We couldn't take the losses. All I wanted was to live an ordinary life. I couldn't adapt to the indulgent, hedonistic lifestyle of their circle. "Regina." Joseph came out of the bathroom, his hair still wet. He leaned against the doorframe, his damp black hair messy and pushed back. His chiseled features stood out clearly in the dim light. I was sitting on the sofa, looking up at him. "What's wrong?" "Fabian got hurt. Do you want to visit him at the hospital?" I thought about it for a moment and then shook my head. "No." Joseph seemed to smile slightly. "Really not going?" "No, I'm not. Two people who have gone their separate ways shouldn't have any ties anymore." Joseph tossed the towel aside and walked over to me. As I looked up at him, he leaned down and kissed me. "Regina, I've come to collect my reward for tonight." The cool water dripping from his hair fell onto my face, but the warmth of his lips and tongue was scorching. Joseph's long, strong fingers tangled in my hair, gripping the back of my head. He pulled me closer, urging me to respond to his kiss, until our breaths were entwined, tangled together. My body melted like spring water, burning with heat. Chapter 16. Joseph caught the familiar scent of jasmine again. 2 years ago, that scent had belonged to Fabian, but now, 2 years later, it was in his arms. Yet, he didn't rush to claim her, to take advantage of her. He had enough patience to wait for the day when Regina would fall for him on her own. What he wanted was mutual affection, something that would come naturally, not a heart forced into unwilling submission. Regina had fallen asleep by his side, but he wasn't the least bit tired. His mind drifted back to the fight with Fabian earlier. What had truly broken Fabian wasn't seeing Joseph holding Regina. It was realizing that the scent of the jasmine sachets, once exclusively his, had now become Joseph's. After realizing this, Fabian had demanded, "Joseph, when did it start? When did you begin coveting her, wanting to make her yours?" The truth was, it had all started the first time Fabian brought her to one of their gatherings. Everyone in their circle was the same, since childhood. They had been surrounded by beautiful women of all kinds. Joseph, especially, had become immune to beauty. But when he saw Regina, standing obediently beside Fabian, addressing him as brother four with such innocence, he couldn't help but take a second look at her. To be honest, she wasn't stunning, she was too slender, a bit plain, just an ordinary, young student. still carrying the air of immaturity, but her wide, round eyes, like a cat's, were both innocent and endearing. She was so pure, without the slightest trace of ulterior motives, the kind of person you could read completely at a glance. Her feelings, just like her, were straightforward, so pure that it moved him. Fabian liked her quite a bit back then, caring for her attentively, and the way she looked at Fabian was even more touching. At that moment, Joseph knew. Fabian had realized it too. He had discovered a side of Regina that no one else knew, a side so lovable. Otherwise, how could Fabian, with his notoriously high standards, have truly fallen for such an ordinary girl? In the dim moonlight, Joseph glanced down at the sleeping Regina. It had taken longer than he originally thought. But in the end, he had gotten what he wanted. He knew Fabian hated him for using underhanded means to steal Regina away. But Joseph didn't care about that. If he had cared, he wouldn't have taken action against Fabian the moment he started wanting Regina for himself. The whole process had taken quite a bit of effort. One by one, the beautiful women Fabian had entertained were discarded, until finally, Gloria was the one to sway him. At the time, Joseph was far away in the south, and when he heard the news, he was so excited that he almost lost his composure. From then on, every move Regina made was reported to him in detail by the people he had left in Hong Kong. She cried for Fabian, heartbroken over his betrayal, and Joseph, all the way in the south, was equally restless and sleepless, until the day he heard that she had moved out of Fabian's house, ready to attend a university exchange program. He had Gloria keep Fabian occupied on one front, and on the other, he made sure Regina's move to the south went smoothly. By some stroke of luck, everything went according to plan, but Joseph would never let Regina know about all this mess. He believed that a man's actions often required ruthless methods. Yet, deep down, he didn't want Regina to know just how low he had stooped. He was fully aware, if he had to do it all over again, he would make the same choices. He never regretted anything he had done. He loved her, and naturally, he needed to keep her close, to spoil her in his care. The 2 years of restless nights had finally come to an end. Joseph leaned down and placed a soft kiss on Regina's brow. She was so peaceful in her sleep, curled up on her side, small and delicate. Her breathing was soft and light. The nightdress she wore carried the scent of jasmine sachets. The fragrance seeped into him, filling him with a sense of contentment and joy that stretched deep into his core. A smile tugged at his lips as he carefully gathered her into his arms. He closed his eyes and soon drifted into a deep, restful sleep. Chapter 17. When I stepped out of the library, I saw Fabian. I had thought that, after 2 weeks, he would have already returned to Hong Kong. But here he was, still lingering. The bruises on his face had mostly healed, though a few scars remained. He looked thinner, and his eyes no longer carried that familiar arrogance, replaced by a certain melancholy. I held my books and stood still for a moment before slowly walking forward. Fabian called out, "Regina." It had only been a few months since we separated, yet the person standing in front of me felt like a stranger. I stopped under the shade of a tree. The evening breeze rustled through, casting dappled shadows across Fabian's face. He looked sad. "Are your injuries better now?" I asked. There was no deep hatred between us. From the start, I had always hoped we could part on good terms. Loving him was my choice, and I never regretted it. "They're better," Fabian said, his gaze fixed on my face. "That night, you were there, weren't you? You heard everything." I paused, remembering the night he was referring to. "Yes, I was there. I heard it, Regina. I regret it. It's all in the past," I replied calmly. "Fabian, we were never right for each other. And you weren't wrong. I'm just an ordinary girl. We're from different worlds." "That's not true, Regina." Fabian shook his head with a bitter smile. He took a step forward, as if wanting to hug me, but I stepped back. "Fabian, it's getting late. I should go. You're with Joseph now, aren't you?" I didn't deny it, but I didn't nod either. Things between Joseph and me were still too confusing for me to figure out. I could only go with the flow for now, but Fabian stubbornly blocked my way. "Regina, Even if you won't forgive me or get back together, you shouldn't be with Joseph. Because of his background? I asked. It's not just that. Fabian said earnestly. Joseph is ruthless in everything he does. Regina, if you get involved with him, it will be nearly impossible to get out later. I used to be close with him, Fabian continued, his tone turning bitter. I know you came to the South for school and asked for his help, but look at what he did. He stole his own brother's woman. What wouldn't he do? Fabian, I said, looking at him steadily. So those men who were following me, were they your doing? Fabian froze for a moment. Yes, but Regina, I would never hurt you. I made sure they were only there to scare you. I just thought, since you're alone in the South with no family or friends, you'd be scared and naturally think of me. So you knew I'd be scared. You arranged for those men. They wouldn't really hurt me, but I didn't know that. Fabian, do you know how terrified I was when I saw those men chasing me with knives that night? I don't care what Joseph's intentions were. All I know is that, in my moment of greatest fear, he was the one who saved me. Regina, there's nothing more to say between us. Go. Don't come looking for me again. I pushed past Fabian and headed toward the school gate. Regina, if you don't want to be with Joseph, I can help you. Think of it as my way of making it up to you. All right? This is between Joseph and me. I'll talk to him myself. Fabian didn't follow after me, and I didn't look back. When I reached the school gate, Joseph's car was already there, but this time, he wasn't waiting inside. He was leaning against the car, smoking, lost in thought. When he saw me, Joseph immediately put out the cigarette. I stared at him for a long moment, half a minute, maybe. Then, without a word, I turned and walked in the opposite direction. Joseph, clearly alarmed, quickly chased after me, but I ignored him, holding my books tighter and walking faster. Chapter 18. Regina. By the time we crossed another intersection, Joseph had run out of patience. He grabbed my arm. I shook off his hand and kept walking. Joseph stepped directly in front of me, blocking my path. Regina, you can either come back with me, and we'll talk this out calmly, or I'll carry you back. You know I'm not above doing it. I glared at him, furious, and for the first time in my life, I cursed at someone. Joseph, do you even have any shame? Joseph, instead of being offended, looked delighted. What would I need shame for? All I want is my wife. Who's your wife? Get lost. I turned to leave again. Joseph followed close behind. Regina, if you keep walking, I really will carry you. I was so angry that I kicked him hard. Joseph stood there, not moving, letting me kick him several times. I put a lot of strength into it, and after venting my anger, I felt somewhat relieved. Seeing me stand still, Joseph immediately walked over and pulled me into a tight hug. He buried his face in the crook of my neck. Regina, if I had to do it all over again, I'd still do the same. I didn't say anything, just gave him another light kick. Joseph, you say you love me, so, are you willing to wait? Wait for what? I pushed him back and looked up into his eyes. Wait until I graduate. You want me to be celibate for 2 years? Just answer the question. Are you willing? Joseph brushed my hair away from my face, cupping my cheeks as he leaned down. When his lips touched mine, I heard his response. Regina, I've already waited 2 years for you, but kissing is allowed, right? Kissing is allowed, but you can't do anything against a woman's will, only if I agree. Fine. Joseph looked slightly reluctant but still asked politely. Regina, may I kiss you now? A proper French kiss. I wanted to scold him, but I couldn't help but laugh. And in that moment, Joseph took the opportunity to cut my face and kiss me deeply. Chapter 19. Over the next 2 years, Joseph kept his word, but somehow, beautiful women continued to show up around him. Joseph was a man with a bad temper, and he was ruthless in his actions. When it came to women who tried to seduce him with ulterior motives, he didn't hold back. But strangely enough, they just kept coming. Even I found myself mesmerized by some of them, especially the few who were so stunning that even Gloria, who had once charmed Fabian, paled in comparison, yet Joseph seemed completely blind to them, unaffected. It wasn't until right before our engagement that I found out from one of Fabian's old friends. All those beautiful women who had appeared around Joseph in the past 2 years had been deliberately sent by Fabian. It was his way of getting revenge on Joseph for sending women to him years ago. That's when I finally understood that Gloria's appearance hadn't been an accident, it had been carefully orchestrated. Joseph may have been underhanded, but Fabian's inability to control himself was his own fault. It was poetic justice. In a way, after all, Joseph had been troubled by these women for the past 2 years. But now, Joseph and I were about to get engaged. Fabian had finally given up. On the night of our engagement, as soon as I stepped out of the bathroom, Joseph pressed me onto the bed. The overwhelming scent of jasmine filled the room, enveloping us both. Joseph didn't take things further, though. He just held me tightly, his face pressed against mine, his fingers intertwined with mine. He held me so tightly that I could hardly breathe, and only after a long moment did he finally release me. He untied my bathrobe. In the soft, flickering light, I turned my face away and closed my eyes. Joseph's kisses trailed down, stopping at the top of my chest. I heard him laugh softly. All the effort I put into taking care of you for these 2 years paid off. What are you talking about? I was both embarrassed and annoyed, giving him a playful kick. Joseph caught my ankle and slowly lifted it higher. His hot kisses rained down on my body like droplets. Regina, you've grown up. Joseph! His lips caught mine, silencing my complaint before I could even finish calling him shameless. Over the past 2 years, his kissing skills had clearly improved. Within moments, I had melted into his arms. The jasmine incense quietly burned. It would take about 30 minutes for one tablet to burn out, but the scent would linger through the entire spring night. And this long night had only just begun.